everyone, welcome to another Wandering Quill book impressions. I am your host, Gabriel Garcia, otherwise known as the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe. In today's episode, we'll be reading the first few pages of Guardian, Rise of the Fallen, Book 1, a Seven Realms universe book by author Emily Lankow. Now, this book already is very fascinating. Again, this one is a digital cover, so you won't be able to see it, but I'll be providing a link down below for you to go and check it out yourself. This book is already very, very fascinating. It reminds me of the films that came out in the late 2000s, early 2010s. I'm getting strong romance vibes, which are very good. It definitely fits the story that the author wants to tell. So, what is the overall summary of the story? Well, pardon me, listeners. After Cassandra is tasked with being the guardian and protector of a fallen angel named Jasper, a fugitive of a war unfolding in the angel realm, Cass finds herself forced to choose between saving the angel's realm and protecting her own. A choice that is even made more difficult when she uncovers a secret that binds her to both. That is already very, very interesting to me. Now, without further ado, let us dive in to Guardian. Do you have any books about angels? It wasn't an altogether uncommon question, especially considering that the bookstore I worked in was less than a block from the nearest church. I barely even turned my head when he asked. But this stranger question was different from every other time that I had been asked about books about angels. "Try over there," I mumbled, motioning towards the section marked religion. "No," the man insisted. There was something in his voice that made me look up, something desperate. "Those are just legends, fables." He was almost laughing, but I couldn't quite discern whether his mirth was genuine or just a result of his nervous demeanor. "I'm looking for information about real angels." Real angels? I felt my breath hitch inside my chest as I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. It had been so many years since I heard someone really seem to believe, someone like my father, that it almost hurt to hear how convinced he seemed. Anyone else would have laughed at this man, this stranger, even if it were not outright. Anyone else would have wondered if he was crazy, joking, or both, and discredited the question altogether. But I was not anyone else. Growing up, my dad always believed in angels. He believed in a lot of incredible things, though I never really understood why. After he died, I learned that it was logical, common, and safer not to believe in such things. But watching him believe so much in those things for so long always made me wonder, leaving me with some amount of subconscious belief that always stirred, even at times when I didn't want to believe in such impossible things. The stranger's hesitation betrayed that he had noticed my sudden attention and the way that I did not immediately dismiss his question. Before I could answer, he withdrew, cautiously glancing over his shoulder as he felt someone watching him. "Never mind," he murmured, shoving his hand to his pockets of his long overcoat. His shoulders hunched, and his gaze turned towards the floor, making shadows fall across his face to conceal his thin, pressed smile. "Forget I asked." But as he turned away, something about that smile made my skin crawl, as if, in a way, I had responded to the very answer that he has been hoping for all along. Chapter 1. It was because of nights like these that I was thankful for my short walk home from work. It wasn't that I minded the quiet. In fact, I actually appreciated it. The quiet allowed me to have a moment alone with my thoughts. But as winter approached, the chill in the air grew eerie and bitter, and the darkness almost felt haunted. It was a feeling that intensified as I passed the old Gothic church down the block. So I kept my focus low to avoid having to look at it directly. That church has bothered me for a long time, for as long as I can recall, actually. But it was always worse in the gloom that pervaded the short winter nights after the change of daylight savings time. Something about those few cold months made the darkness even more powerful to prickle my skin and skip my heartbeat than before. An eerie presence loomed over me as I passed the old church each night. It watched me in a way that made me feel violated, yet curious to seek out the one who was watching me, even though I knew no one was there. I had heard some say that the church was blessed by angels who watched over all that passed by. My father used to say that it was cursed by them. Even though he believed in angels, my father's words always hinted that he knew more about them than most. He believed that there were two sides to every coin, and like humans, angels had the potential to be good and evil. He always said it was naive to believe otherwise. As I lifted my heavy eyes toward the sky, his words echoed in the back of my mind with more clarity than they had for years. There was a thick covering of dark and water-bloated clouds hanging low in the sky over the steeple that crowned the church. Its outline was lit by the haunting, solitary glow of its highest window. As I approached, a shiver quaked inside me, and though it was not from the chill, I pulled my coat even more tightly around my frame, desperate for the comfort of my father's embrace, hugging my shoulders from when I was little. The breeze that bristled the hair on my neck breathed like it was alive. Whispers came from beneath the rustle of the dried leaves that danced overhead. The sound often trickled my ears into the belief that I was hearing a voice, even though I could not make out its words. Tonight was different because as I listened, I was almost certain that I could hear something. The sounds of the far-off voice were mere whispers that I had to strain to discern, but its call was insistent, pleading to be heard. Existence, forgive my failings. It was a man's voice, a low growl barely audible over the breeze. But the longer I listened, the more certain I became that it was actually real, more than just a trick of my imagination. Forgive me, existence, forgive me. The voice sounded desperate, its words truly penitent as they repeated again and again. And then the thought came that I recognized the voice, though I couldn't put my finger on why. I wanted to hope that it wasn't coming from inside the church, but even before I reached it, I knew better. The footsteps carried me just short of the stained glass entrance, and the crunch of my boots in the gravel ceased as I stopped to listen. Existence, forgive me. Existence, forgive me. And suddenly the words stopped. The voice stopped. For a moment, the entire world was quiet. He's in some kind of trouble, I thought, feeling my body freeze despite my mind desperately urging me to continue on my way. I knew if I left, I'd never stop wondering what happened to the man, who he was, and whether I would be able to help him. My fingers trembled as I reached for the massive wooden door of the church. I slowly pressed it open, and as I listened, I hoped to hear the voice again. To my dismay, the air remained quiet, but the silence only served to fuel the fires of my curiosity. A warm illumination glowed between the crack in the door as I gathered the courage to peer inside. The chapel was lit by only the soft radiance of the countless candles, and the air was heavy with the warmth from their flames. I allowed the door to sway closed behind me as I took my first tentative steps inside. My ears scanned for any hint of the sound, while my eyes surveyed an empty building. When at first I saw no one, the impulsive thought entered my mind to call out. I fought the urge out of fear that all I would do was startle whoever was chanting, if they were even still there. And as the doubt crept in, I clung to the certainty that the voice had been more than just my imagination. I continued my slow ascent up the aisle and began to hear a shivering towards the front of the church. My stance relaxed only slightly, still wary of the uncomfortable atmosphere, as my eyes focused on the origin of the sound, but I was confronted by the confirmation of its existence. Halfway up the aisle, I saw the back of a man's head. He was crouched remarkably low at the steps of the altar. His body was hidden by the pews, but as I heard, I noticed his shaking shoulders protruding from behind one of the columns that marked the separation of the aisle and the altar. I paused, now only a few rows from where the man knelt. His face was covered by his hands, but I recognized the gray trench coat that bound his knobby shoulders. It was the man from the bookstore. He was shaking so hard that he almost seemed to be sobbing. I was right. Something in his voice had sounded desperate, but why? My heart sank with the knowing that I had been right about him being in trouble too. What am I doing? I realized. Something divided between my morals and the desire for self-preservation. This is crazy. I should just turn around right now and go home and forget I ever saw him. But I knew that wouldn't be possible, and that's why I hesitated. No, he clearly needs help. It wouldn't be right to leave now. But what can I do? I guess I can't know that unless I find out. My hands balled into fists at the sides as I finally forced myself to call out to him. Hello? I had expected a word to sound more fearful, but there was something about the way it lingered that made my voice sound calm and steady. The shuddering of the man's voice ceased abruptly, forcefully, but his body still shook as he lifted his head to look back at me. His shoulders arched, their outline stressed and unnatural through the fabric of the coat. As he moved, his oddly angular scapulas seemed to be raised or swollen, but I thought a little of it after my focus shifted to his face. The shadow suddenly drew from across the countenance. His countenance, his mask shriveling into non-existence as he lifted his gaze toward mine. His eyes were haunted, even more than the church could ever be. A pair of lusterless gray irises were mounted in each, their own sea of scarlet, the result of many nights of obvious unrest, the surrounding skin of waxy and sallow, amplifying the veins that snaked around his temples to disturbing levels. The immediate change of his expression quickly revealed that he was agitated by my unexpected presence. He was more afraid of me than of whatever he was originally sobbing or chanting over. You. When the man finally spoke, his voice was a low defensive growl from the pitch of his stomach, but when the words mixed with the warmth of a candlelit air, it still trembled from the influence of his fear. You're not supposed to be here yet. They're coming. They'll be here soon. Who's coming? Who? I asked hesitantly, lowering my voice. I didn't want to hear the answer, but it was too late to escape the situation that was now unfolding before me. There was a long silence following my question, as if he had been paralyzed with fear for what he was about to say as much as I was to hear it. As I waited for his response, I felt the silence crippling my strength as I breathed through a painful knot that had begun to twist in my stomach. The angels are coming. Angels? My heart dropped, my stomach lurched, and my lungs seized as I tried to process his response. I didn't want to believe him, but whether this man was crazy or not, there was no denying the certainty that filled his answer. There wasn't a single glimmer of doubt in his gray eyes. He knew that what he said was the truth. As my lips began to part to question his knowledge, a tremor quaked softly beneath the floor. The flames from the candles danced. Their soft orange glow blanched and suddenly multiplied far too quickly for the response to be anything more than imaginary. But the man saw it too. His heavy, tired eyes suddenly became swift as they scanned the room and then returned to me, his ragged eyebrows leaping towards the ceiling. As he stooped forward in his crouch, "You have to hide." His voice was suddenly calm, but his glare was so intense I didn't dare doubt the certainty of his warning. "Now! Hide!" I threw myself back up the aisle, dashing towards the fading image of a stained glass lady stretched above the exit. Merely 2 rows from the door, the force of the tremor multiplied, throwing my body to the floor. Breathless as the impact knocked the air out of my lungs, I glanced back towards the man. He was now at the foot of the altar, his shape disappearing behind the growing level of illumination that filled the room. The light was cold and piercing white, something almost clinical about its nature. My brain and eyes burned as the light swallowed the room, leaving barely an outline of the man that knelt at the front of the church. He didn't look up, but heard his voice even as my sight had failed me. "Hide!" He sounded so far away now. Mindlessly, I managed to scoot out of the aisle on my stomach and wedge myself between the bench and the to the nearest pole. As my brain ached from the glare of the lights, all I could think about was suddenly how hard it was to breathe. Even as I braced myself against the violent quaking that racked the church, my chest clenched, my lungs stalled, and my breath had still yet returned to me. I squeezed my eyelids closed, desperate to block out the pain, in hopes that the darkness would free up enough of my cognition to sustain my body against the imminent blackout that stirred in the stagnant air in my lungs. My lips parted, struggling to draw breath, when suddenly everything stopped. The tremors beneath the building had ceased completely, leaving the air still and quiet. Beneath my eyelids, the semi-darkness had morphed to black, but I could feel the warmth of the prevailing flames filled my lungs as my breath returned to me. For a moment I almost feared that I had passed out, but my mind was too aware of the sensations of my body for that to be the case. Even so, I sensed that something had changed, and that made me reluctant to open my eyes. That was until I heard his voice again. That man, he was still here. I heard him chanting at the front of the church, the same words that had drawn me into the building, but it was different now. His voice was softer, and the way he spoke, though it had barely changed, echoed with a strange, regal tonality that made his previous claims seem impossibly intelligent, and even credible. Existence, forgive me. Existence, forgive me. And then another voice answered his plea. The second voice was strong and determined. Every note it uttered was soaked with charm and persuasion, but even so, his words were cruel and unrelenting. Existence will not answer your cries. They have long since been dethroned, and soon will be eradicated. As they cower and hide, I have risen to rule the nether haven in their place. My body had nearly forgotten the knot in my stomach, but as the second man spoke, it tightened, sending a new wave of pain in my abdomen. My eyes shut open as I bit back a soft groan, clutching my stomach in my hands. The angel of existence is not so easily defeated. And we will actually stop there, listeners. This already sets the stage. I really enjoy the world building. It's just a little sprinkle here and there. So we know that angels definitely do exist. We know that they are, in a way, human in a sense that they are good and evil. I also like the story that it's very natural, set in a very urban setting. It's urban fantasy, which I don't typically get a chance to read a lot of. I don't read a lot of urban fantasy. But this book, Guardian, is a really good read so far. I love that there are different words, unique words that I've never read before. So kudos to the author for adding those in there and really using them to their fullest ability. And this already gets another 5 out of 5 for me. This was a great read. I really enjoy this. And I hope you guys enjoy it too. Be on the lookout for my newsletter coming out soon, as it will detail all of my guests and their interview dates. And without further ado, I will see you all next time. This has been the Wandering Quill and the Wandering Scribe, signing out.